I get it when you've been gaming on a cramped laptop for years and finally have a little cash to splurge. The first thing that pops into your head is maybe I should just get a mini PC that looks like a piece of art and still runs AAA titles. The problem is, every time you search, you see a wall of specs that sound impressive, but you're left wondering if the tiny box will actually fit on your desk, stay cool during a 2-hour raid, and still let you stream, edit videos, and keep a few tabs open without hiccups. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent the last weekend actually hooking the Intel NUC 11 Extreme up to my monitor, a couple of USB-C hubs, and a 144Hz panel, then ran through a few games and a rendering workload, just to see if it lives up to the hype before I tell you whether it's worth your money. First off, the NUC isn't a plug-and-play console, it's a full desktop in a chassis that barely takes up a single palm. The 8-core 11th Gen i7 sits on a proprietary motherboard that Intel calls B-Series, meaning it's a bit more flexible than the ultra-low-power chips you see in the tiny sticks. But it still uses a BGA socket. In plain English, you can't swap the CPU later, but you do get the full desktop-class performance right out of the box. Paired with an RTX 3060 that's been pre-installed on a small PCIe card, the system can push 1080 FireFresh games comfortably, and even dip into 1440p for titles that aren't too demanding. I dropped into Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p, ultra settings, and the frame count hovered around 95 to 100 frames per second on a 144Hz monitor. That's solid enough that you won't feel any stutter, and you can crank the settings a bit higher if you're okay with a 70 to 80 frames per second target. What makes the NUC stand out in everyday use is the combination of a 1TB NVMe drive and 32GB of DDR4 RAM. When I launched Photoshop, After Effects, and a couple of browser tabs at the same time, there was no noticeable slowdown. The storage is fast enough that game load times are comparable to a full-size gaming rig with a similar SSD, and the RAM capacity lets you keep large textures loaded when you're editing video. If your workflow involves moving large 4K video files around, you'll appreciate that the internal drive sits on a PCIe 3.0 x 4 lane, which is about as fast as you'll find on a small form-factor board. Now, let's talk about the practical side of fitting this thing into a real room. The NUC's footprint is roughly the size of a small book, which means it slides easily onto a shelf or sits beside a monitor without blocking ventilation. The case has a single side vent and a rear exhaust, and I notice the fans ramp up to a moderate whine under load, but they never get to the point where they are a distraction. The real hidden trade-off here is heat. Because the RTX 3060 is a full-size card, Intel had to use a compact, high-speed blower that pushes air through a tight space. In a hot summer room without AC, the GPU temperature can sit in the high 80 SC after an hour of sustained gaming. It's not a catastrophe, it still throttles gracefully, but if you plan to run marathon sessions in a warm environment, you'll want to make sure the NUC has at least a couple of inches of clearance behind it, or consider adding an external fan to improve airflow. Connectivity is where the NUC earns extra points. Thunderbolt 4 on the front lets you attach a fast external SSD or a docking station, which is a lifesaver if you need more storage without opening the case. The Wi-Fi 6E module provides a solid wireless signal, but I still ran a wired Gigabit Ethernet cable for the best gaming latency. The rear panel is generous. You get HDMI 2.1, DisplayPort 1.4, USB-C, and a handful of USB-A ports, so you won't have to fight for a hub just to connect a keyboard, mouse, and headset. Who should consider this NUC? If you're a gamer who values desk space, wants a machine that can double as a content creation workstation, and doesn't mind a bit of tinkering with cooling, this is a sweet spot. It's also a good fit for streamers who need a dedicated PC, but have limited room for a tower, because you can place the NUC under the monitor and run the video feed through the RTX 3060 without needing a separate capture card. The price point lands somewhere in the mid-range for a small form-factor gaming PC, So you're paying for the convenience of size, as well as the performance. Who should skip it? If you're looking for a pure, no-compromise gaming rig that can blast 4K at 144 frames per second, you'll be better off with a traditional tower that has more headroom for a higher-tier GPU and better thermal solutions. Likewise, if you're not comfortable opening a compact case to replace the SSD or add